Hello, welcome. My name is Alex. I work for the Place Theatre in Bedford and really looking forward to sharing this conversation and presentation and discussion with all of you today. We've been working with the team at Living Record Productions and Spunglass Theatre for a number of years now, and were very keen to support them last year with their festival, as well as working over the course of 2020 and 2021 and also into 2022 to deliver digital theatre projects and a number of other ideas from artists that explore how we can work in a digital space and how we can create. So this discussion today, it forms a part of that work and is a great opportunity for us to share some practice, to ask some great questions of some artists that we have worked with or are hoping to work with in the future, and find out more about what they've done and how they work and how they've approached the challenges and opportunities that working in an online space provide. So very happy to be joined today by Ellie from Haste Theatre and Tom from Upstart Theatre, who will both talk about the different types of practice that they do and some of the things that they've learned over the last few years. First things first, we are interpreted today. We have BSL interpreters. They should already be pinned, so you should be able to see them throughout the entire discussion. If you have any issues, then please feel free to send a message in the chat, either to everybody or directly to my colleague Simao, who will be kind of looking after the tech for this in Zoom today. I'll just share with you all the schedule, the layout of what we're going to do this afternoon. So right now we're just starting up and introducing ourselves. My name is Alex. I am a middle-aged white man, balding on top with a straggly beard that needs a shave. I'm wearing a sort of patterned jumper, and behind me is a large boxy bookcase on which there is a very sad-looking lily that needs some water. After I finished doing all the introduction, Tom is going to talk. Immediately after that, we will have a chance for any initial questions specifically to Tom about what he's just talked about. Then we'll move on to talk to Ellie and hear from them. Same again, an opportunity to ask any direct questions to Ellie. And later on, we will open the discussion out about halfway through into a wider session, which is questions and answers and a discussion. The intention of this particular event is not for us to sort of stand here and say, well, this is how we do it, and therefore this is the right way to do it. But actually, it's more of a case of let's share, let's discuss, let's talk about what we've learned, and explore this space and this idea that we've touched upon in the description of liveness, or what I've heard other people describe it as eventiness. Very horrible word, so I apologize, interpreter. But yes, that sense of what is it that happens in a digital space that can work to create that sense that we have with live performance of people needing to be in the right space at the right time in order to get it. How does that jar with working in a digital space? What are the benefits of it? What are the problems? That's where we will start our conversation. And ultimately, we're really interested to hear from everybody else who's in this conversation and in this space as well, especially if they have experience of working like this as well, and to hear from you about what it is that you've done and what you've learned. So it's the start of a conversation rather than the end presentation where we pretend we all know what we're doing. I think that's everything for now in terms of me. So what that means is that I can throw over to Tom, and Tom can tell us a little bit more about himself and about Upstart Theatre, the work that they do, the work that they've done, and how they have worked in the digital realm. So Tom, over to you.
Thanks so much, Alex. Really lovely to be here. So thank you ever so much for having me along. I'm Tom. I too, I guess, am a middle-aged white man. I have got sort of short-ish dark blonde hair. I'm wearing glasses. I've got a white shirt with a blue jacket on, but it looks quite black because I've just realised the room behind me is quite dark. That's partly because it's a bedroom in South London, but there are some lovely yellow flowers that are popping up on one side of me, and then within the frame you fortunately can't see the massive pile of laundry that I just took down before logging on to this call. So I am the artistic director of a company called Upstarts Theatre, and we are what we call a playable theatre company. And what that means is we make shows and projects which are interactive, which are driven by what we think are the best bits about theatre, which is the sense of community and artistry and togetherness, but also by what we love about games, which is the sense of play, the sense of interaction. We are animated, I as an artist am animated by making things that put the audience in the center of the experience. So I tend to talk about, instead of talking about audiences more and more, I talk about players or participants. So work that is all about centering audience agency is really what drives Upstart Theatre forwards. And we've been playing around in digital realms of various kinds since about late 2015 into 2016. So if it's all right, I'm just going to talk for a bit about some of the things that we've done and what's been interesting about them. And I think, yeah, it's really interesting to me to frame this conversation around what might be a false dialectic, but I think it's one that's useful to sort of start a conversation, which is the difference between liveness in the sense of we are all physically together in the same space, whether that's a live space or a digital space, and what Rachel Briscoe, the director and theatre maker, Rachel Briscoe, calls eventiness, this sense that we are all participating in the same event. I don't think that those two things have to be the same. I think that they can be if we want them to be. So if it's all right, I'm just going to share my screen. That's also going to mean that probably I'm going to start speeding up my talking and I might not see you if I'm zooming along. So if I do start kind of running off at the mouth, can someone just let me know in the chat or just shout at me? That would be really helpful. So beginning at the beginning of our sort of digital adventures. Back in late 2014, a friend of mine who's a director in Germany said to me, hey, I've got this great idea for a project. It's going to be super innovative and fun and interesting, and you're going to have a really lovely time. I think it's called Phone Home. And it's a way of telling stories of the European migration crisis, quote unquote, of 2014, 2015, across 3 stages. So we worked with 2 other theatre companies, which were Highway Productions in Athens and Pathos Theater in Munich, to bring together a bunch of stories that we developed through participatory research, talking about the experiences of people moving within, into, and across Europe. And we, because we thought it would be fun and interesting, decided that we would present these shows simultaneously in London, Athens, and Munich, with scenes taking place in all 3 countries, and sometimes in all 3 countries at the same time. So in the production shot, you hopefully can see there, this is actually from our dress rehearsal where we were testing a lot of tech, but throughout a lot of the show, on that screen on the left-hand side, you'd have seen a live feed coming from Athens. In the middle, you'd have seen a UK live feed. So essentially, as you can see, the same kind of image as the live audience in the room might see. And on the right, you'd see it the live feed from Munich. And this was, not to put too fine on a point on it, completely and utterly bonkers as an experience. We kind of, having gone from zero live streaming, jumped in feet first and tried to do as much as we possibly could to make sure that we could connect these three venues digitally and broadcast to a live audience at the same time, which was an incredible learning curve. There's so much, there's a whole online evaluation report that you can find on the Upstart Theatre website if you're interested in finding a bit more about this project. But overall, like, one of the things that really struck me is that in this particular project, everything was live in terms of time. In other words, the online audience were watching at the same time as the live and in the room audience. Immediately, as soon as you start talking about this kind of stuff, I don't think we've evolved a clear language yet for talking about what we mean. Who is the live audience in the room? Who is the live audience online? Who is the not live in terms of time audience? Alex, thanks for sharing that link. How do we and how do we cater to each of these audiences? And so immediately in this project, we found, working with three theatre companies who hadn't worked together on a project before, generously funded by the Creative Europe programme of the European Union, which sadly the UK is no longer a part of. We found that we immediately had some tensions on the project between how we work to make the right image for an audience in the theatre versus composing an image for an audience who'll be watching in one of the other venues or on the live stream. So if you're watching the live stream, you had a choice, like the red button. We talked a lot about the red button on your kind of classic digital TV. You know, are you following the feed from London, the feed from Athens, or the feed from Munich? And it's really interesting creatively to try and juggle all of these different elements in your head, because who are you telling the story for becomes a much more interesting challenge, a much more complex challenge, when you're telling that story for multiple audiences within the same piece of artwork that you're making at the same time. I think I come from a background in live theatre. I would say, like, and these days I describe my practice as I'm a theatre director and game designer. But when we made this show, I'd very much have said I'm a theatre director. And so I remember really coming down hard on the side of, we're going to make this we're going to make this show pop for the people who are in the room. And then people who are watching on the live feed, well, they'll get a lovely experience too, but they're slightly lower down in the hierarchy of consideration. If we're making the show again today, with everything that we've learned, especially since spring 2020, I'm not necessarily sure that I'd have made the same decisions. But I'm really proud of this piece of work. If you want to find out more about it, do pop on the Upstart Theatre site and check out the long and copious evaluation that we wrote. But it's got beautiful pictures and graphics, so you know, I like it. So we didn't really do anything within that space for quite a long time, partly because, if I'm honest, the phone home experience, because it involved so many moving parts, so much technology, so many different stakeholders and partners, kind of burned me out for quite a long time about doing this kind of stuff. But a couple of years later, again, kind of immigration is a theme that we keep coming back to as a company for all sorts of reasons, both personal, political, and creative. We have experimented quite a lot with using Twine, which some people here may be familiar with. It's a free piece of software that you can use primarily to create text-based role-playing games. BrickQuest is a satirical game. It takes about 5 minutes to play. It's a response to the government's new immigration bill that was going through the Commons in 2019. And we made it essentially in an afternoon in order to be published on Twitter, and we hoped a few people would notice it. Sort of as a way of, as a company who's driven by political values, of intervening in that debate. In terms of pure views, until this year, it is our most engaged with piece of content. We spent 2.5 years making Phone Home, start to finish. It cost £80,000, I think. That was just our portion of the budget. This cost no money, and it reached 40,000 people. Of course, the experience is completely different because essentially it's not theatre. We don't have people in a live space. People weren't sharing in time, but there was something really interesting about literally sitting in our co-working space where we're based on my phone and watching those likes and retweets rock up. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly why it went so viral. I think there's something about timeliness. I think there's something about creative response to a political issue. And I think that timeliness and creative response to politics is something that we talk about a lot in theatre. And we very, very rarely deliver because of the industrial structures that we work in. This is possibly slightly going off topic, but if you'll permit me to rant for 30 seconds. I think that right now, obviously, theatre is in the state that it's in, but even pre-pandemic, we talk about wanting to make an urgent piece of work that responds to a burning political topic. And then what do? Well, you phone a venue, and unless they're Alex or a handful of other wonderful people, maybe you get a response within 2 months, and then you go to the Arts Council and you try and get the project funded. And before you know it, it's 6 months down the line, and the original idea that you had is probably still good, but the issue that you're talking about has been going on for 6 months, and you haven't had the chance to engage with it. What we found with things like BrickQuest, and more latterly, we made an app a couple of months ago, which is a handy tool to tell you whether you're attending a work event or a party. What we found with making these kinds of content is that they are rapid to make, and you can immediately get a response from them. And as a theatre maker, as someone who is about, what I want, if I'm honest, is to be in a live space communicating with people. But this was a much more direct way of being able to have that communication than I'd had through the 2.5 year long political theatre project that we made in Phone Home. And I think that's interesting, and I think there's a learning point there. I still haven't quite figured out what the action points are from it, but I think it's worth keeping in mind. And then the pandemic hit. We all know what happened. I would say that my experience and Upstart's experience was that we just had a show at Vault Festival, which had gone really well. It had been nominated for an award. We were really excited about touring it. And we were just starting to look at tour booking when essentially everything shut down. And we're all, I think, as a sector, I'm sure many people here are still responding to the grief and the challenge of everything that's happened to our industry as well as to everything else. So I won't rehearse this too much, but we essentially had to throw out all of our plans, which was fun, as did everybody else. We, after a couple of weeks of basically sitting around going, well, what the hell do we do now? Emma Sampson, who at that time was our executive producer, and I decided, wouldn't it be fun to just do something ridiculous? And we started doing a weekly pub quiz from our flats. And that again was one of these things where it wasn't a lot of work to put together, but the first 800 people showed up. After that, numbers dropped because there were pub quizzes everywhere, but it was really interesting sort of seeing that kind of first wave. And alongside that, we did a series of podcasts that were linked to one of our projects. And we also, we sent something into space because that's theatre, right? Something about creating a sense of event with that. So we'd had a commission in 2019 from Chapel Art Studios in Andover, who were looking for a community-based arts project, talking about seeing their town from the bigger picture. And one wet Tuesday afternoon in the office, I said, well, surely the biggest picture that you can see anything from is a satellite photograph, or that sort of Earthrise photo from the moon, or that bonkers photo from Voyager, the blue dot photograph where you're seeing a tiny mote of dust. How can we do that on a £2,000 production budget? And it turns out what you can do is you can send up a weather balloon with some cameras in it. And so we launched it. So did this shot here in the middle, that's from about 33 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. And then the whole thing falls back down. Why did we do that? Because it was a way of telling a story about a particular place that wasn't linked, that wasn't bound by events, wasn't bound by place and time. That project now has been made into installation, which is in Winchester Science Centre. If you're ever going through Winchester Science Centre is bloody great, and also it's got our thing in it. So do check it out if you want to. We know that so far this year, at least 60,000 people, sorry, in the last financial year, at least 60,000 people have seen it. We also made a little game that goes with it. And again, if you pop on our website, there's a little film that shows me grinning like an absolute fool when we managed to recover the whole thing. Cool. I'm aware that I'm at risk of running over time, so I'll just sort of bring you up to speed with what we've been thinking about. Dare Festival is a thing that we have been running every year since 2016 in partnership with Shoreditch Town Hall. And we had plans every year until the pandemic hit. It's been in October. And every year we commission 6 new playable shows. We present in development performances of them, which in 2020 was a really difficult thing to be doing. So the first decision that we made is to push the festival back to February, because the whole pandemic thing couldn't possibly go on till February, right? Like things must be kind of back to some kind of normal by then. And then when Christmas 2020 happened and we were going back into whatever number national lockdown that was, we took the decision to go ahead and to push the festival online, which involved essentially supporting our artists to make what became 5 Zoom-based shows, each one 30 minutes. And one show, which you can see on the bottom left here, which became an interactive installation in which we built a 3D interactive replica of Shoreditch Town Hall in the game making software Unity. That's still online. Again, you can get to that via our website. It's a really haunting and evocative piece created by This Egg Theatre Company, which is about sort of exploring the past through sound and story and music. It's really gorgeous. But the big thing that we wanted to achieve with Dare, which we've tried to achieve with all of our shows, and particularly with all of our festival stuff, is how do we create a sense of shared event? And for me, actually, it made me think a lot about why I go to the theatre. Like, I think why I go to the theatre and why I make theatre are slightly different things. And I make theatre, I think a lot of the time I make theatre out of habit, if I'm honest. It's what I know how to do. But I also do it because I love the connection with people. I'm a director, so my connection with people through theatre is kind of vicarious, I suppose. But I love being in a room full of people and seeing them respond to a piece of work. So something that's hopefully inspiring and exciting and fun and thought-provoking and challenging and all those things that we want theatre to be. If I'm really honest, when I go to the theatre as an audience member, I want that as well, but I want that less. Like, I want to be stimulated, I want to be challenged, I want to be engaged, I want to be entertained, all of those things. But I kind of think, for me, the thing that I've really missed about going to the theatre, and I've missed it in going to digital theatre as well, so Zoom shows, whatever. The thing I can get quite a lot from watching a digital theatre show, but the thing that I can't get is all the stuff around the actual show, the stuff around the actual play, hanging around in the bar, talking to my friends who I'm going with about the work itself or about something entirely different. Like treating theatre as it's a reason for us to come together, but the important part is actually the coming together. Unfortunately, I don't have any screenshots of this, but the solution that we came up with for Dare last year was we built a whole front of house space in Gather, which is, I think, an absolutely brilliant platform. It basically allows you to create a 2D top-down replica of a physical space. So we basically made another version of Shoreditch Town Hall, but this time one that you could move around, and when your avatar gets next to someone else's avatar, a little video conversation pop-up appears. So like I bring my avatar next to Alex's avatar and bam, me and Alex are having a conversation. Alex gets bored of me banging on about digital. So it goes off and talks to Ellie, and then like they have a little thing turn up, all of that. It's a really, really wonderful tool. And my favorite thing about Dare Festival 5, especially bearing in mind, I got COVID in the middle of this, so I didn't go in and do any delivery, was being able to sit in my flat and move around our front of house area, and chat to audience members and find out what they thought of all of those shows. So strongly recommend thinking about like, what is it's not even the wraparound, like what's the reason people are actually there? People are actually there to feel part of a community. So how do we create that sense of community and not just broadcast our work at them? Couple of other quick things. So we got commissioned last year by Royal Botanic Gardens Kew to make a project for their COP26 offer. So we made a card game. We made a card game in a month, which was awesome and fun. And we're now redesigning it for release in, it does say late 2022. Good. I thought it said 2021. I haven't invented the time machine yet. Thinking again about how do we tell stories in a slightly different way? You know, creating work in, you know, for want of a better term, the live space has become more of a challenge in the last 12 months. And that's forced me, an upstart, to think a little bit differently about how we present work. And we now think of ourselves about, because so much of what we do is about creating agency for our audience, for our players, how can we give them that sense of agency without them having to travel to Shoreditch Town Hall or the Place Bedford or Northern Stage or wherever it might be? How can we make it so that they can carry that experience in a little box that fits in their blazer pocket? And especially for something that was being made at COP, which was about influencing people to take that piece, literally physically, to take that piece of work home with them. So we put together like an ideal journey for each one of our boxes, where they'd be given out by someone at Kew. They would hopefully be played at COP, but then whoever had played that game would put it in their blazer pocket or their jacket pocket or their handbag, and they take it back to wherever they were and they play it with their kids, or they give it to their boss for their boss to play it with their kids. A way of continuing the story that this project is telling about reforestation as a nature-based solution to climate change. So that's kind of a bridge project for us. And what we're now working towards is this Red Planet Revolution, our 2022 show, which builds on the live show that we created for Vault Festival 2020, and is now finally going out on tour this summer. And what we're doing with that project is combining live performance events with a digital game that we're making in Unity, which is the same program that we used to build one of the Shoreditch Town Hall replicas for Dare Festival last year. Is booking now. So if there's anyone here from any venues who would like a really light on its feet interactive show about the future of the human race, then hit me up. And the reasoning behind this is thinking about like, what does bringing people together in a live physical space do, and what does digital work do? I play a lot of games. I love games, and I especially love computer games. And what they let you do is explore a story at great length. If I'm making a theatre show, I've probably got 2 hours max. And really, for my own attention span, I think I've got an hour and a bit. For a digital project, you've got anything from 30 seconds, 5 minutes for something like BrickQuest, to what currently in the demo version of this right now takes about 20-25 minutes to play, but we think it'll probably be a 2-hour playthrough in total if you want that. So thinking about digital as extra content or separate content, and what I'm hoping is there'll be people who play the Spark, which is the digital version of the game, and there'll be people who come to the live show, Red Planet Revolution, and there will be hopefully quite a lot of people who do both. I mean, I want there to be as many people who do both as possible. But I'm really excited about the possibilities of what often gets called transmedia. How do we get to tell our stories in a variety of different forms? And as theatre artists, I think we have, as an industry, taught as far back as I can remember, and I've been in this game for 20 years nearly, which makes me shudder to say that, but it's true, so I should own it. I think we've talked a lot about agility. I think we've talked a lot about applying our creativity. in all sorts of different ways. And I think that we have an opportunity. I mean, the pandemic has all but destroyed lots of us, and it's been awful for the sector. Of course it has, and I'm not disputing that at all. But I think one positive that can come out of it is seeing things like, I see Paul is here as well. Hi, Paula, who's been brilliant at starting up things like the Digital Performance Network. We're here talking about the potential of working online. We're talking about how we can extend our reach and how we can build communities around our work, which I don't think were necessarily there 2 years ago to anything like the same extent. So I guess for me, I remember talking about liveness an awful lot back when we were making Phone Home, and how liveness is the most important thing when we make theatre. And part of me still thinks that, but I think I've come to question and interrogate in my own practice a lot more what lies behind that. What are we excited by when we talk about the prospect of liveness? And I think that's about, for me, apart from anything else, it's a sense of community with our audiences, with our players, which we're finding at Upstart through, for example, we've just started a Discord server about 4 months ago that lets people chat to us about work. And because we do a lot of online artist development work, we're now bringing a lot of those people who've engaged with our work there into the Discord and having conversations with them, getting together and playing games with them through Discord, which has been really fun, really cool, and has led to some new connections. That sense of community feels really important, but also like what digital platforms offer us is a sense of extending and expanding the universe of our work. I've spent a lot of time in my life making work designed to be experienced by, in my head, like at least 200 people, but in practice often like 20 to 30 people at a time. And so it's exciting to think, okay, so with this version of Red Planet Revolution, you know, this is something that people could still be experiencing and exploring this in 5 years. And with the work that we've done with the Andover Space Programme with Winchester Science Centre, we know that 60,000 people have seen it so far. We know that more people are going to see it. People are going to watch video, people are going to engage, and hopefully it's going to inspire people to think about not only their town's place in the wider universe, but also about how they can get involved in things that seem impossible. And that feels like, in the context of what's been a very dark couple of years, it feels like a really big win. So yeah, I mean, it's still very much an exploration that's ongoing, but I'm really happy to be exploring the potential of liveness, of eventiness, and how digital and live and in-person performance can interact in interesting ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. That's really a really interesting insight into all of the work you've been looking at over the last few years. Does anybody, either live or in the written chat, have a follow-up, like immediate question for Tom? Feel free to turn your camera on and your audio and ask a question, or just write it into the chat, whichever you feel more comfortable doing. If not, I do have a question, so I can ask one, but I thought I'd throw it out there to others first. No, okay. I want to go back for a moment and ask this, and talk about the idea of hierarchy and audience hierarchy that you mentioned with the original show that you did. And explore a little bit more, I guess, about, you said initially the hierarchy was very much in the room at the time, then online at the time, and then down the line, anyone accessing it at a later date. Why? What was it about the process that caused you to change that around?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for me, it's partly about where I came from as an artist, as a maker. You know, like I have been trained. I trained myself. I've worked primarily on the basis of, you want to make something that is for people who are part of that live event. So I think just almost like a default position for me historically has been, yeah, we make it for the people who who are in the room. What's that old West Wing quote? You know, decisions are made by the people who show up. I guess decisions were made for the people who showed up originally in that show. What's changed about that for me? Well, obviously, you know, some fairly major events have happened over the last couple of years that have forced, as I said, have forced us to think in different ways. I think partly it's about access and longevity. You know, you can make a lot of work that is seen by the, if you're making work only for people who see it live, then that piece of work, because theatre is ephemeral, it disappears eventually. And also just, I've been thinking a lot about the types of, I was about to say media I consume, and I hate that phrase, but I don't have a better one, so I'll go with it for the minute. Like, actually, what do I enjoy? One thing I was going to mention, but didn't in great detail, talking about things like Discord, and the potential of, you know, I'm on quite a few theatre Discords now, and I'm also on quite a lot of games Discords, and the discourse, sorry, this is really unhelpful, I'm using discourse and Discords together. The amount of conversation that's happening in the games Discords is an order of magnitude bigger than the amount of conversation that's happening in the theatre Discords. And why? Because theatre people go to a Discord mostly to talk about their show, or maybe to have like a theoretical conversation with a handful of others about the content of projects or like approaches. But there are other channels that exist to do that as well. And so people are sort of popping off all over the place. Whereas if you go on, for example, you know, I'm really outing myself as a bit of a geek here, but there's a particular role-playing game called Mothership that I'm a member of the Discord server for. And, you know, I log on to the Upstart Discord, and we've got 50 members and 5 people online right now. And I log on to the Mothership one, and they've got God knows how many members, and there's 1,000 people online right now. And so just thinking about that, and why is that? That's because a game, especially a role-playing game, but I think all games, the experience of playing a game is co-created by the makers of that game and by its players. Like, you and I could play the same game and have a completely different experience. And that's why there's a really vibrant, emergent cultural field on Twine, not on Twine, sorry, on Twitch, on YouTube, of people playing games and showing other people what they can do with it. And in theatre, I think, you know, we aren't creating for that breadth of audience. And it just feels to me like that there are people out there, and especially now because I'm focusing more and more on the interactive and the playable, I just want people to play with. And I think like the more people you engage with, the more people you can play with, the more fun there is to be had. And like, not being funny, for me, I think one thing that the pandemic has done is it's reminded me that this stuff is supposed to be fun. Like, there's lots of other things it can be as well. And I think it's really important that theatre is political and challenging and engaged and is about the world. Like, and I don't want to step away from any of those things, but my God, what we really need is a sense of community and fun. So yeah, sorry, I think I'm just going off on one now. So I'm gonna
No, I think that's really interesting, and it's something that I would love to come back and follow up with, and I've made a few notes to do that. Because my initial feeling about what you're saying, and in terms of the work you're making as well, is that you're looking for a very active audience base.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things we've seen across our digital offer from 2020 to now is a sense of those people who really do engage with that. That is also what they are looking for.
Yeah.
But that is, of course, it's not what everybody is looking for when they go to see a piece of performance. And for some people, actually, it is about the content, and it's about a slightly more passive role, you know, that they are there to enjoy something. They might talk to some people if they feel like it, but they don't want to have to talk to anybody. And at the end of it, they might go home, and that, you know, it almost is more like a kind of television or film experience. for some audience members. Anyway, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Instead, let's throw over to Ellie and hear more from her about the work that Haste have made, because I think that will speak a little bit to some of the stuff that I've just mentioned as well. So Ellie, over to you.
Hello, hi everybody. That was really interesting, Tom. It's so great to hear more about your work, and it threw up lots of questions in what or like sparked lots of little thoughts in what I'm about to talk about in ours. I am a white, blonde, short-haired, female identifying artist, currently wearing a big jumper because I don't want to put the heating on. And I have an upturned sofa behind me in my background against a newly plastered wall. Didn't have much choice in where I was going to be doing this, and we're in the middle of decorating a new house. So yeah, I'm Ellie, and I am 1/4 of Haste Theatre, and we're a device made up of 4 female identifying artists. Our work is very multidisciplinary, so within the one show we'll always use singing, movement, probably one prop or sort of piece of set that we transform and use in many ways to create sort of different locations. That's quite a signature of our work, which also goes in hand with puppetry, I guess, a bit of object manipulation. We often use puppetry. And I guess it has a basis in clown, and that's sort of like what we're trained in, which is obviously largely to do with sort of listening to your audience and responding to them. Even if you're not necessarily directly saying to that person, you're kind of getting feedback and energy from the audience, and that kind of influences what you're doing on stage and the way that you react. So I think in terms of our work, we've often, I'll give you an example. We've made a show and we've gone to a theatre to perform it, and we've got a technician or a technical operator who isn't ours, it's somebody from the show, sorry, someone from the venue, and they'll see sort of a run through of our show when we're teching and whatnot, and I think they'll largely, and we've actually witnessed this, think, oh God, feel really sorry for these girls. This is shit. Like, there's what are they doing? They're faffing around with a few sheets. But that's because there is no audience in the room, and obviously we're not kind of like giving it full energy at that point. But I think where our shows really come alive is with the energy in the audience in the room, and that immediately, obviously, I mean, lots of acts will know this, that immediately obviously picks up off our performance, but also means we add in a lot of different ad-libs, and suddenly like the kind of not very well written script comes alive with a lot more sort of humor and stuff. So for us, the audience being there really creates the show, even if they're not necessarily coming up on stage. But we do sometimes in some shows also get audience members up on stage. So that being said, obviously feel we have to talk about the pandemic, because that's sort of what pushed us into creating a digital show. We had a couple of tours cancelled. We were just about to embark on a big Arts Council funded project, which to our minds is going to be sort of like our biggest creative, most ambitious project yet. And that obviously all had to stop. So we kind of sat around for a while, quite a long while, and I think we were just a bit sort of like miffed and pissed off and couldn't apply our brains to what it is that we could do creatively, because we weren't together. So we kind of sat around for a bit. But then we pulled ourselves together and we came up with a few ideas, and I'll sort of just talk you through the sort of development, I suppose, of our digital work. So we started off with something called 7-Day Story Collective, which was just a way, in our minds, it was a way of us being creative on some kind of platform, as well as giving a platform for other artists to be creative. So basically it was a story that someone started, a minute-long video, and then each day the story unfolded but was told by a different person. So it was a story in 7 chunks told across 7 days by 7 different people. What was amazing about this was that it meant that we got to kind of engage with lots of different artists all across the world. We had lots of people from America, some from China, and also within that minute-long video, which obviously all you're allowed on Instagram, you could tell it however you wanted. You could just write it and read it. Some people did lots of things with sound. Some people kind of turned the camera towards the wall and read it, which had a different effect. So it really did spark sort of a lot of nice, like, creative little tinglings and ideas. And again, kind of, we felt our profile, I suppose, had completely gone as a touring company. We couldn't tour anywhere, we couldn't do anything. So it kind of like made us feel like we were still within some kind of community and still there and visible in the industry. So after that, we made connections with one of my friends who is a drag artist, who's a drag queen called Ophelia Payne, and his business, so I was going to call it, his drag queen persona absolutely thrived and was basically made through lockdown, because he came from a photography background, and he's had a really good sort of like artistic eye digitally, and he just, I don't know, he really thrived as a drag queen, and Ophelia Payne, his drag queen, really developed over the time. So he suggested us doing a cabaret night, which is something that we do in person once a year to try and provide a platform for other artists to showcase a bit of their work. So we were like, yeah, great, this will be something that we can get onto. And I think the variety night that we created online with Ophelia Payne was a lot more like an event, as opposed to what I'm just about to talk about, which is our show, which we tried to create, a physical theatre show. But yeah, it was really, really great fun. And I think we engaged with a lot more people than a lot of our theatre shows, sometimes going to little rural sort of theatres and maybe playing occasionally to 6 people sometimes, because everyone could sort of log on, but also everybody didn't have to directly focus on it all the time, because they saw it a little bit more like TV. They were having a few drinks, the interaction with the audience came through them typing in the chat box. So we kind of reached a lot of people. I don't know where I was going with that, sorry. Latterly, so in the second lockdown, it took us a while to get to it, we ended up creating a co-production with Mouth of Lions Theatre Company, one of which I think is on this call. And we really wanted to see if we could, so they have a sort of similar style to us, and they mostly make children's shows and children's theatre, but very much in that kind of clowny way, and getting a lot from the audience, and that's sort of where the magic happens. It's that kind of intangible thing about being in front of an audience and with those people in a room. So we thought, how can we make a show that's essentially going to be on a screen, but still has that kind of magic happening somewhere. So he started the base of a story about Valentina Tereshkova, who was the first female cosmonaut, which is the Russian word for astronaut, we also learnt. So after a bit of an research period, obviously about her life and the time that it was set, we got in the Zoom room with all of us as actors, as well as the creative team that we had put together. So in finding this creative team, it was all very new to us, obviously, and none of us were very good at using Zoom or the computer. We just knew that we had to find a Zoom technician. So somebody that could help us out when we were sort of in trouble digitally, but also someone who could explore with us as part of the devising process what you can do digitally and live on Zoom. So Zoom as a tool, just like the lighting and the sound and the set, what Zoom can do to help sort of devise and create this nice, like, exciting, fully rounded show. So we found an amazing guy who we have coined the Zoom wizard, called Sam Osborne, and I believe we might have found it through you, Alex, because the place was very helpful in helping us to create the show. Obviously, oops, a little bit. Yeah, so we got in the room. One good thing that we found was it was very easy to get us in the room all together when we're on Zoom. One of us lives in Italy normally, so it's quite hard for us to find a time to rehearse. We could all be there together, which is great. But we got lots and lots of stuff to play with, because we were like, okay, we need stuff to play with. And I think normally with our work, and I know that not all companies work like this, but we're so used to doing everything ourselves as for performers and for creators, the design aspects tend to kind of come, we think about them in the beginning, but they come as an afterthought, because we think, right, we need something, we'll either create it physically or we kind of make do with a bit of newspaper until a time comes that we can kind of make a concrete version of it. And that's where the designer comes in and says, hey, you could do it like this is much better. With this show, we had the designer, the Zoom technician, the sound designer in the room at the time, and their contributions went towards actually physically devising the show. Like, we couldn't have made the show without those contributions initially, whereas normally we as 4 people can normally like put together and do some storytelling together initially. So we had lots of stuff, and we really liked the idea of, even though it looks like we would be on a screen, because we would be, how could we make that real? So we started playing with household objects and then using the camera like you would, we watch lots of space shows, obviously. So, you know, they make little models when they make space films, and then they zoom in on them. And so the perspective looks like they're roaming across the moon or whatever, but actually it's just a little model of a moon. So we're sort of trying to replicate that. So after a lot of playing around with these household objects and things like hair dryers and bits of cellophane and coffee makers and things, we ended up creating a lo-fi, what we kind of call like a lo-fi high-tech show. So we had an amazing designer, Caitlin Abbott, who created things like this, which were really nice hand-drawn frames, and obviously paper, sort of house object things that you have, but we would be interacting with the sort of lo-fi set. I would be in my sewing factory, and the bits of sort of set move. So I think taking everyday objects and that lo-fi approach, but putting them through a digital medium, we felt was quite exciting, and wasn't the same as our sort of like physical liveness, but went somewhere into creating some kind of magic, which was, or another kind of magic, but some kind of magic which was intangible but sort of similar to. I thought it's important to say as well, music-wise, another great sound designer we worked with, she was in the room, and she was often also trying to take household like field recordings and things, and then distort them and use those to kind of overlay over the sort of images and stuff that we were creating. So it really was this kind of like handmade feeling, like through all aspects, that created the finished product. From a performer's point of view, and we do, as I mentioned, do quite a lot of audience participation and response to the audience, we had a little play with how we could kind of introduce that into the show. So I was the narrator in the show, and then we zoom into the book world, which shows Valentina Tereshkova, played by Sophie, who I believe is also on this call. So it was kind of down to me as the narrator to kind of welcome the audience in and make that initial connection with the audience, which is something we equally do in our normal shows. Often we'll be in the room already and we'll say, oh, hello, sir, come on in, how are you? That was a little bit tricky as a narrator, because in order to make direct eye contact in my mind with the audience, I had to be looking into the camera. So I'm speaking to you now, but at the same time, I needed to be able to see the tiles of people who were in the audience in order to sort of speak to them and sort of pick people out and make them feel like they were physically in the room with us to get that sense of liveness. So there was a lot of sort of tricks and a lot of direction from our director being like, okay, Ellie, quickly look now and then look back, or sort of take a wider view so you can take everything in. So just kind of from a performance perspective, that was kind of a little bit of a trial and quite interesting. But we came up with a few ways of sort of actually physically engaging with the audience, as well as sort of welcoming them in. We got them to write in the chat box, and this was a show for kids, and I know that's kind of like a fairly sort of standard thing, but it at least meant that they were engaging with us in that way. But we also had got them to do a pre-show task, which was to draw their idea of the universe, and they were told in their pre-show email to bring that to the show, and then at a certain point we asked them to all hold up their pictures of the universe. So you've got a whole screen of people showing, you know, stars and moons and what their idea of the universe was, and our Zoom wizard screenshotted that and then made it so Valentina Tereshkova was looking at that and then describing what she saw. So when she shot into space, she was looking at the universe that they had created. And I think that was a really, really like lovely way of kind of getting the audience to feel like they were sort of very much involved in the show, and a different way of sort of creating liveness. I mean, we did the show again, but obviously the universe always looks different because people have drawn different things for their universe. Yeah, one more thing I think to mention just on that show is we wanted to create this live thing. We created this live thing, we reeled them in, we showed them, you know, their own pictures back at them and that kind of thing. But then we did also have a little bit of pre-recorded material in there. And that's where sort of a little bit more of the Zoom or televised tricks come in, because we had just 2 actors, but we had Sophie, who's playing Valentina Tereshkova, also playing 3 other characters, which were the 3 women that Valentina went up against in this race to become the first woman in space. So I feel like we really got the audience on board thinking, yeah, this is totally live and there's only 2 actors and we're involved. And then it got to sort of this competition phase, and all of a sudden on one screen there was Sophie as one person, Sophie's another person, Sophie's another person. And that was just quite a kind of fun thing for us to play with as actors. We obviously we can play different characters and swap roles and swap hats on stage, for example, sort of that classic kind of thing to do, but never can we be in the same place at the same time and seen at the same time. So that was quite a fun thing to kind of play with. And I think we'd worked hard enough and got the audience on board enough for them to not think like, oh, that's just recorded, even though children probably wouldn't have thought that, but I don't know. Some people might have done. They were kind of really on board with seeing the technicalities of us moving puppets and then seeing us play with the idea that we could all be like on stage as 4 people at the same time. I think overall from creating that show as a company, there's a few things we learned that has definitely sort of influenced us going forwards. Firstly is a question of access. So the shows that we, performances we did of Valentina Star Dreamer were our sort of preliminary performances, and we did intend, and we still do intend to do a further run and sort of enhance those and put captioning on to make performances much more accessible. And that's something that we've had a few chats with you and other people at the place, Alex, about sort of ways of doing that. But I think it's obviously a lot easier to have captioning and stuff put on a show that is on Zoom than it is to have things potentially projected or whatever. But it's caused us to think about that in our future work, and now we're trying to make our work a lot more accessible and think about how we can integrate captioning and stuff within the show to make it much more accessible. We've also realized the benefit, and I think this kind of touches on what you were talking about with your work, Tom, creating a legacy or kind of reaching more people around the show. So with Valentina, we created a pack that we could send to schools that had lots of games and things that were geared towards their SATs, but we also created a whole website, and we also on that website had a few sort of games which were more sort of very simple learning games, but we'd never done that before. We never created a sort of web page that went alongside anything. And I think thinking outside the box and thinking outside the room and what we can do around our show to like engage more people is definitely something that we were forced into learning through doing the doing the digital show. I think one thing that we learned that's possibly slightly negative, or maybe this is just from a personal point of view, is that actually, and maybe this is just a very selfish performers thing, but theatre performing is all that I know. I don't want to be on TV, and it's really confirmed to me that I don't want to be on TV, because I enjoy performing to an audience. An audience hopefully gets a lot from our live performances and from that energy that we create together and with the audience, and I equally get a lot out of it, and you have to work twice as hard when performing to a camera to try and keep your sort of energy up and pretend that, you know, that energy was there, which was quite exhausting. But also, you know, when the show's done, there isn't that sort of like drink in the bar afterwards where you get to go and see people. There isn't, I hesitate to say, rapturous applause. And so you just kind of are left feeling, I don't know, maybe a little bit less fulfilled as a performer on our end. But having said that, I don't know, maybe it's just something about getting used to it, because we've done a lot more live performing than we have sort of digitally. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say, really. And I welcome.
Thank you very much, Ellie. That's a really great insight into the work that you did and how you came about making, in particular, that piece. I think that last thing that you're talking about is definitely something I have heard echoed from a lot of performers who work in the who are used to mostly working in the live arena, and I remember early on in some of, I think maybe the first lockdown in 2020, hearing and reading some people's views that they were stand-up comedians who then tried to transition into doing stand-up comedy through sort of Zoom gig, and the absolute like soul drainingness of putting everything out there through the camera, going at it 1,000 miles an hour, and then at the end just being like, I guess I'll go make a cup of tea then. So I think that there, as artists, definitely there's probably something that needs, there's probably some learning that needs to come in from other arenas about how you plan for that sort of sense of deflation that comes from performing exclusively on your own to a camera. Mm-hmm. I'm wandering off into chat, but before I do that, does anybody in the meeting at the moment have any specific questions that they would like to follow up directly with Ellie on at this moment? Again, happy to put your camera on and your mic, or if you want, write something into the chat. And if not, I have a question that we can start with. Just give everyone a second to type up, because I know these things can happen. So I think my question to you, Ellie, is you obviously did a lot of work in the rehearsal Zoom about like understanding the confines of the space that you were working with, and sort of working with the the 3D nature and the frame. And it sounds to me as well like there's an element of knowingness that you added into the show, of like wanting to have that magical experience and have those things that pop up and those moments where people go, oh, is that, oh wow. But that you also played with the fact that it was it's the lo-fi version. Like you're not getting the big glitzy Las Vegas magic.
Mhm.
You're getting the street magician. So I wanted to, I guess I wanted to find out a little bit more about like what the journey within the rehearsal process was that took you from understanding, okay, these are the things we can work with, to going, we're going to do all of this, and we're also going to give a little bit of a wink to the audience that says, you know, we've got to work on a budget. What was that process like?
I was going to actually just share my screen and show a tiny little bit of the sort of moving animation, which might help this question a little bit. So if you, hang on, let me try and share my screen. Where are we? So this is just from a tiny part of our trailer. So that's just a little snippet so you can see. I'll stop sharing now in a second. Little snippet so you can see the sort of like moving live animation. So he's talking about how do we get from talking about all these things and playing to actually deciding what it was sort of going to look like.
Yeah, and also like how you, like at what point did you start to realize that you wanted to acknowledge the fact that transitions aren't going to be the smoothest things in the world, and that you're going to you know, you're playing with literally physical props that are right there.
Yeah. I do think there was a point in rehearsal where we had a lot of fun playing with all these things, and then and all the creatives had a lot of fun playing with us with you know, all these moving objects and puppets and things. So I suppose it was a question of perspective, because how do we get from space, which is so big and vast, how do we show space in this sort of tiny little box? And our minds went straight to puppets, but then it was very difficult to, as actors, suddenly start speaking when we've been in this very sort of like drawn, silent puppetry language. And how did we make that transition and decision? I don't know, I think we kind of went through audio over visuals, then to actually seeing us. So we'd written, as to create a lot of material, we'd written a lot of sort of letters as characters to each other and that kind of thing. And so we turned off our cameras, and just in the creative process, we're like, right, let's stick that bit of puppetry next to, with nothing around it, and just the sound of us saying this like letter of Valentina, for example, speaking to her mother in this letter. So it felt like we just kind of like split the senses up. So it's like, well, we've got the little puppetry visual, we'll add a little bit of audio, and then I guess the next step from that was to actually see the person saying the audio, and then it all sort of came together. It's very difficult to describe the process, really.
I suppose
I think that was very helpful. Sorry.
No, sorry. In the moment, you aren't thinking about like capturing that moment. You're just experiencing it, moving through it, getting towards the end, and then maybe later on you go, how did we get here? As opposed to like, you're not noting your journey as you go through it.
Sadly not, did not know the journey.
Awesome. Well, I think the opportunity now is to sort of move over into a sort of wider conversation, and to encourage other people to join in, to speak if they feel confident doing so, or to just write something into the chat. I'm happy to act as factotum and read out whatever people put into the chat, within reason, so that we can get their input into the conversation. But I'd like to move back into the sort of the wider conversation, the wider prompt of the event, of this idea of like liveness, what makes something live, who is it live for, and to sort of re-explore that, and rather than sort of be rather than fire questions at the two of you, which might feel a bit invasive, perhaps to start instead with sort of an idea that's come to, a thought that's come into my mind while I've been listening to both of you talk, which is the sense that working in a digital space has perhaps forced artists to think a little bit more like venues than they've ever been forced to do before. That there's a sense of, certainly as a theatre venue, prior to the pandemic, we were having a lot of conversations with people about how we aren't in the performance business, we're in the experience business, that ultimately we are bidding for people's time and energy and attention. And as much as we are bidding against other venues or film or television, we're also bidding against theme parks, computer games, sports activities. And so as a venue, we are like encouraged and have spent time over the last 5 years now, perhaps even longer, starting to say, well, what is the whole package? It's not just about the content of what goes on the stage. That might be part of what brings people out to come and spend time with us, but that we have to consider the holistic approach of, well, what is it that makes them get in their car physically and drive to our space, and spend time with us and be in that room with those people and have that shared experience, and that it's not just about the content, that the shared experience does happen in the auditorium with the performers. But if we just rely on that as the only part of the shared experience, and the rest of it is a commercial experience or a product, like a consumer experience, that we are pitching ourselves against other consumer experiences rather than anything else. So I'm really interested in this idea that, because you're starting to think about, okay, what wraps around this show? How does the audience or the player or the participant or whatever it might be engage with us from the very start? Like the moment they know about the show, their engagement with the show begins. And then they're stepping into a space where then they're going to purchase. Then it's about getting them excited for the thing that's going to happen, which could be something that happens on a kind of miss it, miss out basis. You got to be there at that time, at that place, or you don't get to see it. Or might be something that they can latch into whenever they feel comfortable or able to do so. And that content then is also like enveloped in something else that kind of lifts the content up. That's an idea. That's an opinion. Do either of you have any sort of response to that? Does that feel like it's something that's true for the work that you've been doing?
I think so. We were sort of thinking about this pre-pandemic a few years ago, about how can we get to the audiences and the communities before the show actually happens, and kind of entice them. And we had this idea with a previous show that we were gonna sort of do a live or physical installation to do with the themes of the show, but not necessarily touching on the story, in the foyer of this theatre that we were going to, a new venue, and we hadn't been to sort of that part of the country anymore. So the idea was that, you know, lots of people walking by, and when they come in would see it and be interested in it, and then the show would follow a sort of in the program a few months even later, so kind of like a little teaser, sort of taster. And then I think also we're thinking then we were led to think that what if we got sort of local community groups, and that would be like young people from schools, but also from other groups that we'd identified who were in the area, get them to make the installation themselves, and that be put in the theatre. So we were kind of really getting to know our audience and involving them in our work, instead of them just sort of like sitting there watching it, as a precursor to then doing the show. What I'm now thinking is that, which I never thought of before, you could do that on a digital platform so much more easily and reach so many more people doing that in a digital way instead of actually physically getting them in. And also, what are the chances that there are going to be that many people walking past the theatre or into the theatre foyer? You're still capturing just the theatre audiences, aren't you, who maybe probably would look at the programme anyway if that thing was in the programme. So sorry, I'm just kind of thinking my feet here, that actually, like, thinking around that in the digital space, and with like the stuff that I've seen that you do, Tom, we could definitely create something digital that goes around the show or before the show and surrounds the show to kind of reach people, which I guess we were, you know, trying to do a little bit with the website and stuff with Valentina, but we could take it sort of so much further.
Yeah, and while you were talking, I was just looking at the Valentina website and thinking, "Ooh, crosswords! I love a crossword." Decoding things into Russian and all of that, like, it's immediately engaging. It's really fun, and it wouldn't take an awful lot more time and energy to sort of, you know, build on the aesthetic of it and make it feel even more kind of interactive and engaging and awesome. Yeah, like it's really interesting. Alex, what you were saying made me think a little bit about sort of before I was mostly in Upstart, was mostly focusing on playable and interactive stuff. You know, we do, you know, kind of reductively what we call like sort of, you know, issue driven plays, in that kind of very kind of new writing, and then kind of more devised work. And quite often, you know, you're touring a show to the studio of, let's call it nameless venue, and someone from marketing or participation will get in touch and go, "Oh, have you got your education pack? Is there anything that you can do in terms of engagement activity for these for this particular group that we're trying to reach? Or we think, you know, this audience will really like your show. Can someone go in and talk to them?" I think in the UK, small companies have been doing the work. I don't know if it's the work of venues. I think it's the work that we always assumed would be done by venues for a long time, and at least since 2010. I mean, 2010 is, for me, like, big changes to theatre don't start in 2020. They start 10 years earlier with the introduction of austerity. And we've had to, for all that time, do more weight than most of us were trained to do, to carry more weight than most of us were trained to, in thinking about those kinds of engagement issues. And so you do kind of what Ellie and Haste did with Valentina, and you make the education pack, and the education pack now is an online resource, right? I think for me, what's changing is, rather than going, I have to make this piece of and other digital content to support my show, I'm now going, how do I make things? Sorry, that sounds really vague. But and again, content. The corporate language of this is bloody awful. But like, what is it that you're making that audiences are going to want to go and see? And you can look at that through a very capitalist lens and kind of go, what are people going to spend their money on? But I think the really interesting question for me, bearing in mind how much great free cultural offer is out there as well, is what makes people want to spend their time with you? What makes people want to come to your space or log on to your particular channel? And especially post-pandemic, people are starting to go out to things. The numbers show it. But there's still hesitancy, as I think lots of us are finding, for people to book tickets. And maybe going to see shows is less of a priority for people than other things, going for drinks, going to a board game night, meeting people for dinner, like things that are about conversation. So I guess I'm kind of going now, I definitely, I started out thinking, well, I was going to make shows and people would come and see the shows and that would be awesome. And then I went through a phase of thinking, well, I'm going to make some shows and I'm going to make some other things that go around the shows to either encourage people to see them or experience them, or to encourage venues to book them or the Arts Council to fund them. I'm speeding up, Nettie, I'm so sorry. And now I'm kind of reverting back. And I think what's changed for me is that the content is the content, like the stuff is the stuff. And I'm not wedding myself to, and it has to be in a room that people have paid to go into, and they're in there for 60 to 90 minutes, and my company performs. I think that's the big difference. And so that kind of is like a venue, but I also think it's like a studio or a content creator. I think like Upstart is now thinking a little bit more like a game studio than like a theatre company used to. But I think how we think isn't that different to how any theatre company has to think, other than we're a bit obsessed with audience agency to probably an unhealthy degree. But I think that's I think the paradigm has shifted. I think it was shifting before, and I think 2020 and beyond has been the thing that's really tipped us into this new reality. And I think we're going to be living there for quite a long time, unless there's a sudden and radical change in policy.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ellie.
Can I just ask in Upstart Theatre, the other members of your company, do you work with the same group, or is it sort of you? And are they all also into gaming and sort of very good at the digital kind of side of things? Because I feel like we have physical theatre people, and we're good and love to move and jump around and be loud in a space, and it takes a lot of getting other people involved in self-education and employing of other people in order to kind of break into another sort of sphere. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's so much that I'd say in response to that. But I think something that I used to think about myself is that I'm a theatre director and I direct plays, and that's what I know how to do. And to be fair, that's what most of my initial training was. That's kind of how I got started. And then kind of through making things like that Twine game, the Brick Quest thing, I kind of went, oh, it turns out I can do this. And what you all did with Valentina, it seems to me, is you kind of went, there are other ways to work. And it is hard, I think, changing that way of thinking. But even just looking at, that bit of video you showed us and the gorgeous sets that you're making, I would have no idea. Us at Upstart, we just would not have thought in that way. And what's really interesting about moving into this kind of weird digital universe, I think, is that because we can't, it's like rivers or something, right? We can't flow this way, so we have to flow around. And as a result, we create these really interesting, the obstacle causes us to create these really interesting.
Your limitations cause the creation.
I mean, and like this level of limitation obviously like has been, can I swear? Am I allowed to swear?
Sure.
It's been absolutely fucking shit for everybody. But like I think, so the people that I work with, so we've got a core team of 2, and then other people come in and out on a sort of rolling basis depending on what we're working on at the moment. We've got 2 new people starting on Monday. We've got actual employees, which is very exciting. But yeah, and some of the regular returners for us are very kind of gamey, and some of them really not so much. And some people love games but have no idea how to sort of bring them into a theatre world. But like sort of see the thing. It's like anything, right? Not everybody that you work with has to share all of your overriding ideology, and in fact it's sometimes a lot better if they don't, because then you have conversations and questions. So Hannah, who is kind of the producer who we basically have been running the company together for the last year and a bit, like is much less into the kind of world of games than me. But then when we make stuff, if she likes it, then I know it's going to work for audiences, because she's the person that I have to persuade. And I find that, like, I think that's really valuable. I don't know if that answers your question, Ellie. Sorry.
Yeah, it does. I just wanted a bit more information about your wider team, I guess. And yeah, that's great. And I totally see the having people from different backgrounds and with different likes and dislikes creates the best thing. You're targeted from all angles, and you can work with to create something that's kind of for the most amount of people that you can.
And I think that thing of like creating work for the most amount of people is probably something that's changed a bit for me, like in a weird way, because it sort of in the last few years I've become much more like laser focused around interactivity and agency and all these kind of sort of game design terms that I love to kick around. But I actually think like what you described in making Valentina Star-Dreamer and having audiences give you the images that then become the backgrounds of the show, that's as perfect a moment of audience interaction as anyone could come up with. Like, it's bringing them into the world of the show. I think like, there's something about the kind of ideology of performing on Zoom in particular that I think really lends itself to interaction, especially because like you were saying before, Ellie, like, you don't get anything back as a performer, like at the end of the experience. And that's kind of why we created our whole Dare Festival front of house thing, so that at least you could have a bit of like aftercare really for the audience and for the performer. But the audience has to come first, obviously. But like, feeling that sense that you don't have much comeback from the audience after the show, which means that actually you really need that interaction within the show. And people need it too, because otherwise they could be watching Netflix, and the production of what they'd be seeing on Netflix would be, they've got the CGI, the Valentina Tereshkova movie on Netflix, if it exists, which I don't think it does, but if it did, like that would have a lot of very, very expensive CGI. But they have what you've got, which is the potential to go, and we all know that I'm actually in my front room because I'm out of my house, but I have made this with my imagination, and isn't that better and more fun? And that's where like playing with limitation becomes really exciting, I think.
I think there's a really, sorry to interrupt, Ellie, I think there's a really interesting element in there as well, which is that the idea that I don't think anyone ever thinks that they're not live. Does that make sense? Like, if I'm watching a film, I'm not sitting there going, I'm watching something from the past. Like, I'm in a live moment, consuming, enjoying, experiencing that thing. I'm not sitting there thinking, well, this wasn't for me, because film sort of has that language baked in of course it lasts forever, whereas we still have that theatrical, the ephemeral thing sort of in the core of the theatre piece, which is like, which is why I was really interested in your hierarchy discussion, Tom, of like, well, of course, the people who are bothered to be there in the moment, they get the best thing.
Yeah,
because
very patronising.
No, no, you didn't. But it's sort of like it's underneath.
Sure, yeah, it was sort of
putting words in your mouth.
That's 2016, Tom. You know, he's wrong about a lot of things.
But the reason that made me think, because I wrote down a note here, which is that what a lot of people have tried to do, in particular through Zoom performance, is kind of create live studio television on no money. Whereas the irony being, of course, that live studio television, whilst it has a live audience, it makes it very clear that its primary focus is this person here. And you might be in the background over there having a wonderful time at the live show and laughing along to the recording or whatever it might be, but you are secondary to this person here, who's the real consumer. And so to try and sort of break a mold that is not quite 100 years old, but certainly 80 years old, of like studio shot live audience work, and say instead, actually, we're theatre artists, we know better. We should do it for the people in the room first. It's kind of a bit like, oh wow, okay. And I think a live audience, like people physically in the room audience, might actually be more forgiving of not being the center of attention than the viewer who is sat on their sofa, on their phone, making a cup of tea. Because there's just so many other ways and things that people can go off and do that can draw their attention away. Does that sound? Am I talking madness, or do people?
Absolutely.
That is actually something that we learned from doing sort of an initial smaller work in progress of Valentina, that any sort of longer scenes or things which on stage you might in person on stage you might think were like drawing out tension and moments of silence between characters and stuff, we just kind of found that they didn't work. So scenes had to be short and snappy. That's also sort of part of the reason why we use the different forms, because that keeps people's attention. So we've got some drawing now, but then we've got real person now, and then we've got the drawing moving. So we really did find that keeping things short and snappy and having to grab people's attention, and multiple times where we've made the audience interact in multiple ways, is what we needed to compete with people going to get a cup of tea, or going to the loo, or talking to their friend next to them. Yeah. And
also, I mean, we haven't
when we have TV on, if I just.
Ooh, yeah. Well, exactly what just happened in my ears is one of the things I was about to say, which is we haven't talked in any way about the problem limitation that comes with the internet being prone to not working. It's sound can go out, videos could drop, a power cut could destroy it. Things that are completely out of your control might cause audio to get out of sync or get garbled. And exactly that thing of not wanting to give too much time for space, like in what might work in a room where exactly that thing, you can put something out there, let it land, have some silence, give it room, give the audience time to be thinking about it. If I go silent in the middle of this conversation, everyone's going to think that my internet's dropped.
Yeah.
And so that or their internet's dropped, or something's gone wrong, and it's taking people out of the moment.
I think also it's just the way that we, because we're so used to looking at screens, but the way that we respond to screens is different to the way that we sort of respond and interact with people in person. And because of social media and adverts and flicking and swiping and sort of things kind of popping up all the time, that's, even though we're seeing a theatre show on Zoom, we're still essentially, in the case of Valentina Tereshkova, we're still essentially looking at a screen, and so the audience reads that in their like I'm looking at a screen kind of mind, maybe. Whereas when you go to the theatre, you know, it's in person and you sort of read it in a different way. So you've got to find ways, if you're doing theatre on Zoom, to get the audience around and not read you in a screen time way.
Yeah.
Hi, can I just add something to that? Hi, I'm Sophie. I am from Haste as well. I've just been making some puppets behind me whilst you guys were doing that. So just proof that, yeah, you can be doing anything whilst listening to these, but if we're in a room, I probably wouldn't be doing that. But one thing I was thinking about, like the audience interaction. So we did Valentina in schools, and when their classroom was spotlighted and they saw themselves on the screen, it's kind of like, you know, when you're at a football match and you see yourself, and just the reaction that we got just from that really simple technique, or Ellie as the narrator saying, oh, put something in the chat, oh, Otis from year 2 says he would take this. And I think there's something really important as an audience of being seen. And that's what's really been difficult. And just in those little moments, especially for younger kids as well, being like, what is happening? I'm on screen, whoa, I think was a really successful way that we found to draw people in, and fight against that, oh, Sophie's making puppets whilst we're doing this situation. That's all I really had to add. But this has been really interesting. So I'm going to disappear again now. Bye.
Thanks, Soph.
That's really cool, Sophie. Like, I think like that's also part of the thing. Like, that was a helpful observation. Of course, everything is part of the thing. What you're talking about, Tom. Yeah, like I think there is something really interesting in making performance for online that makes us question our assumptions about what theatre is. So most of us came up, you know, from a post 20th century, post 19th century theatre experience, which is basically there is a proscenium march, you sit down, you're quiet, you watch something nice and you applaud at the end, and everyone goes out and is happy. And obviously there's been loads of stuff that that challenges that, but that's the dominant model for all of us. And even though, like, you know, even Brecht or Joan Littlewood or whoever still had like sort of baked in assumptions about like what the audience behavior is going to be, if only because what they're going to do then is try and encourage, like, you know, that Brecht thing of like encouraging people to keep their hat on in the theatre and all that kind of stuff, which I didn't really get at the time, because when I first read it, when I was doing my A-levels, because who wears a hat? But now the point of it is, like, if you're doing a show on Zoom, people are continuing, like Sophie has been, doing whatever behaviours they'd be doing anyway, in the same way that they might be if they had a show on telly or the radio. And so our relationship with their attention is different. Like if you come and see a live show at the Place, then the sort of baked in expectation probably is that for the length of the length of the show, you sit down and you shut up, but you give it your full attention. Like, whereas now, people might or might not sit down and shut up, but we can shut them up because we have the power to turn their cameras on and off through Zoom. But what we can't control is their level of attention, which was the one thing that we thought we could definitely control. So I think for artists at the beginning of the pandemic, like, you could see it the whole time. No one had any idea like what the audience would go, like what audiences for Zoom shows were going to do. And the most successful bits of Zoom theatre that I saw were ones that completely acknowledged the fact that, you know, we weren't in the same business anymore. So I'm thinking of like Coney's Telephone, for example, or I've forgotten the name of the company, but the guys from Bristol who did Sherlock and Holmes that popped up all over the place. Or like Ellie, what you're describing, with like really clearly going, like acknowledging the reality of what's actually happening in the performance space. I mean, like, I think that's aesthetically important any day of the week, whatever situation that we're in, but it's even more important now we're on Zoom, because like for each one of the shows that I saw, I was definitely also on my phone. Like, and sometimes I was live tweeting, and sometimes I was responding to a creative prompt. And sometimes on shows that I shall not mention, I got bored and logged off. Like, and all those things are fine, because actually in this, in a digital performance context, the audience member has the agency, much more so over that side of what they do. But we have loads more control over the image that we send them. Like, you know, they're going to be looking at what's on the screen if they're looking at the screen. So yeah, like all those dynamics have changed. And so it makes me kind of feel like, I don't know, getting a bit high flown here, right? But I think it means that we're now in like an Elizabethan theatre paradigm, like a Shakespeare era theatre sort of paradigm, instead of a Victorian paradigm. And I think we're better off that way, actually.
Yeah, I demand your attention, but you don't have to give it to me.
Yeah, it's
and I have to work for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would say that over the sort of 2 years that, it's not quite 2 years, but certainly the last 18 months that we've delivered a variety of different digital performance pieces, we have seen that the two forms that speak best to audiences and that people have engaged with the most have been ones where the tool of Zoom is entirely participatory, and I'm thinking back in particular to work.text that we programmed back in August of 2020, which didn't have any actors. All the work was done by the audience. There was, I think that was Sam, who was your technician, but I can't remember exactly. There was a technician wizard sitting behind there, making sure everything worked at the right time. But ultimately, the audience did all the work. And so it felt like they were all, that community came very much together. No, there were no passengers on that one. Those pieces have worked really well, which were very much, you got to be there at the right time and the right place. But while you're here, we're going to work with the tool that we have and that we understand. And we're not going to pretend that this tool is a different tool. We're going to work within the structure of this. And we're going to use every trick in the book to make that work. The other pieces, and I realize that we haven't talked about this at all in our discussion, but I know for a fact it's going to be something that we talk a lot more about in the next week's digital arts industry event, when we're going to be joined by Paula Varjak and also hopefully Alex Kelly from Third Angel, is to sort of say that the other shows that worked very well were ones that were entirely pre-recorded and were consume at your own pace, take your time, when you make your time for this, pause it, stop it, move away, go and do something else. Those works people, I think, engaged a lot with. In particular, I'm thinking of an audio piece that we did with local artist A.D. Muller, which was called Another Goodbye, which was an audio piece that she made about her experience of losing or going through sort of the very end of life with her mother, which happens during the pandemic, but not from COVID, but happened, and she was abroad. She's originally a German citizen, now living and a citizen in the UK. And so that's a sense of being detached, and audiences really seemed to gel, not just with the content, but with that idea that we're not going to make you listen to this at a certain time. That actually this is quite a complex and deep piece, and maybe you won't feel comfortable consuming it all in one go, because it might dredge up things. It's about grief, it's about loss at a time when we're still all dealing with grief and loss in various different capacities. And so that opportunity that's given to experience something in a moment is really helpful. The flip side of that exactly is it's about attention. And the reason I'm looking around strangely is because I have things like this piece here, which is Dear Tomorrow, the Actors Touring Company piece that they made in 2020, in which there is a ritual that involves lighting a candle and reading out a piece of work. I got this in November 2020. I still haven't done it.
Yeah, me too. My copy's next door.
But it's always there.
Yeah.
If at some moment this continues to be a live show that I can experience whenever I want to, and it could be 10 years time. It's a very strange world to find ourselves in, where we can make a thing that's in the moment, designed for a very specific period of time, but actually as an artifact may not be, someone may uncover it 100 years later, which we would never have thought about in terms of a performance of a piece of theatre. I got totally sidetracked by my own train of thought there. Sorry.
I really enjoyed it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Read.
Anything else? Oh yeah, Sophie loved that show. Which one, Sophie? The work.text.
Yeah, work.text. Basically, I think only I saw it, and then I just talked about it every day that we were making Valentina, I think. And everyone was like, oh, there she goes again. But there was just something, and I watched it not how you were supposed to, because I was naughty. So instead of spotlighting one person, I wanted to see the whole audience. And there was it was really beautiful to see the moments of recognition where someone had been sent a message and you could see that they were preparing themselves to talk. Or I don't know, in the one I saw, one guy got spotlighted and he didn't realize for about a minute, and it was one of the most poignant but funny things I'd seen in the entire year. So yeah, I shouldn't really know what my point was about that. I just bloody loved it and wouldn't shut up about it.
I suppose that's again the audience, like consuming it in the way that they want. And yeah, of course, like maybe that wasn't how they'd initially intended, but hopefully the company thought that it could be seen in that way, and it just added an extra sort of layer and element to it.
Yeah, and also people could get involved or as not involved as they wanted, I think. Which was a really important way, and something I know, Elle, you talked about us like getting people up on stage, which was something that in real life that we used to do, but I think we've really gone away from now because
some people just hate it.
Some people just hate it, and often I think, well, what is the company trying to do here? They could have made something as professionals, and yet we're just going to laugh at this person. So I think yeah, it's just an interesting, what work.text did was great in terms of managing people's involvement.
Yeah. Yes, it was very much an opt-in show. And I would be fascinated to, which I think is different in a theatre space to in a sense, if you've booked a ticket for an online performance of a show that's very much about that kind of theme, and you get into that space, what I'm trying to say is I didn't see a lot of people choosing not to opt in. In a sense, like having gone through the journey to get to the point where they're in the Zoom, they've already done 90% of the work of opting in.
Yeah.
Because I'd be fascinated, and I'm sure this has happened, because I know they've done the show again subsequently, and in fact I believe it's now got another life coming back to the original live version of the show that's going to happen soon. But I'd be interested to know what's happened with them when they've done that, and like most of the people in the room don't engage, because in a show where all of the work is done by the audience, if the audience chooses not to do the work, there isn't a show.
Yeah, but then
at least,
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. Like I was just thinking, like, so a lot of our stuff is sort of, we've never done anything that's completely actorless, but Red Planet is basically facilitated and the audience do its own thing. And about 10 years ago, like our first real sort of proper interactive show, The Situation Room, would not work unless people got up and did stuff. We did that show, I think, 50 odd times, and we never had a point where people didn't engage at the moments where we planned for them to engage. And I think, like, similar to the Zoom thing with workshop text, like if you turned up to a show that bills itself as interactive or game-based or playable or whatever word you want to use, like if you paid your money, like actually the one thing that we haven't talked about in quite these terms in relation to Zoom shows is like buy-in, like actual sort of cash buy-in, but also sort of, you know, almost like audience intellectual buy-in. If you pay, you know, you pay 15, 16, 18 quid, whatever, to come and see a piece of interactive theatre, like you're probably going to interact with it because that's the ticket that you bought, that's the thing that you signed up to. Whereas I think sometimes with Zoom, you know, people aren't necessarily like, and you know, we also haven't talked about with Zoom, you're in someone's house. I mean, you know, you guys are in my bedroom right now, which is weird. And we've kind of got out of the habit of thinking of that as unusual because we've all been forced into it. But I think in 5 years, it'll feel deeply weird again. Like, I kind of hope it'll feel deeply weird again, because otherwise we'll be still stuck in our homes, right? But like, so it means with something like, yeah, it sort of depends what you sign up for. But yeah, I've definitely been in online experiences, and I love to interact with shows, obviously, like, but I've definitely had that days where I'm not really into it and I'm just going to keep my video off and occasionally like chip in if I absolutely have to. But yeah, like there's that whole economy of attention and of privacy that we still need to kind of keep thinking about with liveness.
Thanks, Eleanor. Glad that you enjoyed it. Yeah, we're going to wrap up, or start to wrap up anyway. So thanks to everybody who's still here or who's joined us thus far, or if you're watching this after and you're logging in, thanks for being here and giving us your time and all this way through to the end. It's interesting, Tom, that you mentioned that sense of being in everybody's space, because this is a conversation I want to have again with some other people that we've worked with, and in particular an artist called Victor Esses, who we supported to do a show last year, and they did their piece Unfamiliar, which had been up, was originally a live theatre show, and they completely reimagined it as a digital experience called Unfamiliar at Home. And although it was a Zoom show, live show, you know, a fixed time show. Let's stop calling it a live show. Let's call it a fixed time show. There wasn't that level of audience participation. In fact, there was no audience participation. The audience came in, and it was done as a webinar rather than as a Zoom call. So you didn't know who else was in the audience at all. You only saw what you were being shown. And so it's a very passive experience, but the way the show was structured, because it was literally in their house, and it's Victor and his partner, Yorgos, and it's about their journey as a same-sex couple to on the adoption, to build another family. So it's incredibly personal, and then performed within their own family home with cameras that are hidden away. So what they did was create a piece that was deliberately very voyeuristic. Like you were held at an arm's length as an audience member, and you felt like you were really like intruding on their lives, but not in a creepy way. Like the piece wasn't manipulative, but it was very, you still had that real sense of like deliberately peering through. And I just thought, I came out of it thinking, how much time and energy and money would we have spent to try and recreate that sense of intimate, voyeuristic performance in a theatre space? Like, we would have to have built a house, and it still wouldn't have had the same impact as literally looking into their house. So it just makes me think, makes me go, I want to have this conversation again about like why they did that, how they got into that mindset. They wanted it to be live, but then they didn't do any of the other things we've talked about live so far. So watch this, because I might have this conversation again. Go ahead, Ellie, sorry.
I was just saying, I suppose that kind of goes back to, but in a different way, using the tool, but they did it to different sort of ends. So they used the tool of the conference call as an emotive tool, and they were aware that they were using it that way to create an emotional response and add to the piece, in the same way that we were talking about the knowing you're using Zoom with the audience to other ends in some of the other shows, and like our show that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I definitely think.
Oh, sorry, go.
I was just going to say, I think the most successful shows I've seen are ones that have really taken the form and said, yes, we are on Zoom, and why is this different to being in a theatre? What can we do that you would not get if we were sitting in an audience together? So that sounds really fascinating. And I think to go back to one of your questions, Alex, for us, like about telling the audience and knowing with the audience, because we're very used to clowning, we can't not do that kind of thing, of that very clown looking at you, looking at this like bike light that I was holding above my head, which showed that my spaceship was about to crash. Like it was just so in our nature, and I think we were scared of doing that to start with, and then when we started to embrace it, I think that's when our show started to work really well. And I think, yeah, shows that are made for that format, basically I just don't want to watch any recorded full theatre shows. Basically I just want to watch ones which are made for Zoom, or go to the theatre and watch a show.
Yeah, that is an interesting a dilemma of the work that we are all engaged in making, is and that is what sort of made me want to have this conversation, and makes me want to continue to have this conversation, and also perhaps to hear more from artists who have done that, who have gone, actually we're going to film our show, but we've done it in a really good way. Like, there are a few out there that I did watch during the lockdown which really did grip me, and actually, were recorded theatre shows, but they still took me on that journey, and kept my attention, but by no means like probably less than 10% of the ones that I watched did that.
But also,
go ahead.
So much to say. I think in terms of access, I mean, we managed to go to rural schools, which would take us a day, of work and travel and set up, and we were just there. I ran workshops with rural schools during during lockdown, with kids who don't, blah blah blah, get to be together. So just that sense of access, and there is no disrespect to recorded theatre shows, because there are people who cannot go to the theatre, and that's amazing that theatre venues are really putting a lot of onus on that, and more importance on that, because it is a privilege to go to a theatre space and share it with people. So there's also that amazing thing that's come out of live digital, what did you call it? The event, what did you call it?
I called it time-based, I think, or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'll have to watch the video back to remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you're quite right there, Soph, that there is a lot of conversation that we need to have, and then venues in particular need to lead on this, of saying we're not back to normal. At least not everyone's back to normal, and we all spent 18 months making work that could be accessed by pretty much everybody. Obviously not everyone, because there are still financial costs associated with accessing work online, but and accessibility costs as well, like making, as you say, getting captioning in, or as we've got for this, having BSL interpreting. So, but we mustn't lose sight of that. We mustn't go, well, oh, thank God, now we can have people in our rooms again. The rest of it can go. It was just a nice little side thing that we did. And so it's certainly something that we're thinking about as venues and have been pushing very hard for, and are trying to convince the powers that be and the funders and the people with deep pockets that that we don't just want to go back to doing what we did before, and we actually feel we have a responsibility to keep what we're doing running, and continue to be able to put out work for that can be enjoyed by anyone in their home, and that might mean looking at more live streaming options. That might mean looking at more work that is pre-recorded that can go out, or recording a live screening and then in a really high quality, like really thinking about the way that we record that, so that in the kind of NT Live style, but on a much smaller budget, so that the work that we continue to bring to Bedford can reach all corners of the community in different ways. I'm very aware that I said we would finish at 4:30, and it's 20 to 5 nearly. So I guess if anyone has any last thoughts that they would like to share at this moment, otherwise I will wrap up and we can go off and enjoy spring.
Just thank you, really. It's been really, really interesting and great to chat. And thanks to our BSL interpreters as well.
Yes, thank you so much.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for joining me and having this conversation and sharing the work that you've done and the thoughts that you've had about that. Yes, also thank you to the fantastic team from the BSL interpreting. We will be recording, this video is recorded, so it will be uploaded, so you might be watching it on our YouTube channel, so it will go up there shortly thereafter, and we'll also link it to the Living Records site for their Living Record Festival. If you haven't done so, and it is the right year, please go and check out the work that is available on the Living Record Festival. There's some really interesting pieces made by a whole host of different artists, a lot of whom are making work for digital space for the very first time. But also there's some great work on there that's playable. There's some great work on there that is multidisciplinary or multi-arts based, and work, I think, for aimed at everyone, from small children all the way through. So go and check out them. They are at thelivingrecord.com, and you can go forward to their page where you can see all of this year's festival content. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm back for one final conversation as part of the Arts Industry programme, which will be next week on Thursday, the 24th of February, and where I'll be joined by Paula Varjak, the artist who's made a lot of work in the digital sphere, and who is one of the people behind setting up the Digital Performance Network and the Discord there. and also Alex Kelly from theatre company Third Angel, and he will hopefully be talking a little bit about the piece that they made during lockdown, which is a playable artifact show, part game, part postal adventure. The topic of that conversation is audiences of geography versus audiences of interest, which makes it sound perhaps a little bit more like it's an either or. But we're centering the audience experience for a moment, and we're going to have a conversation about how artists and venues work together or sometimes against each other when it comes to reaching audiences for digital work, and explore in a little more detail this idea of how do you go about finding, when you can deliver your work or your artistic experience to anyone in the world, how do you go about reaching them, and what are the mechanisms that artists can employ, and and how can venues help support that? So that's the content of next week's discussion. If you're around, please join us. It's going to be starting at 4 p.m. GMT, and again, we'll be online on our YouTube channel afterwards. Finally, once again, huge thanks to Ellie from Haste Theatre and Sophie from Haste Theatre for joining us, and also Tom from Upstart, and everybody else who joined us during the conversation and had anything to say. And otherwise, thank you very much, and we'll see you again. Bye.